on Facebook as well. Okay, live on YouTube. It looks like Facebook is trying. If it chokes, it chokes. No big deal. Okay, we're live on Facebook. Okay, so today's foundation talk is going to be about Passover. And I've made a slideshow to try to help share information that will be a little bit more practical about Passover. So tonight at sundown is when Passover starts. And I wanted us to explore what would it look like for Gentile disciples of Yeshua to try to keep Passover or to try to celebrate it is a more specific language. Yeshua, I pray that you bless this time. I pray that you would equip us. Hope this makes sense, and I pray that it leads us to deeper worship of you. Okay, so Passover and how to celebrate with the hope of clarity following obedience. Hopefully that is a foreshadowing of how I think about this endeavor. Hopefully we get more clarity the more we try to do Passover or try to celebrate it. So this is not about, for us, it's not observation of Passover, or it's not a duty or obligation wherein we have the threat of breaking that obligation in the Torah. This is something we commemorate, memorialize, and celebrate. So we'll get better at it. This is my first time doing a presentation, so let me know if it gets wonky. But hey, church, most of us are Gentiles. Okay, this is a question on a lot of people's lips. Why are we even talking about Passover? That's a Jewish thing, right? I think that's kind of how a lot of Christians have thought about this. And truthfully, okay, for a long time, we had nothing to do with Passover. That is true. Gentiles had nothing to do with Passover for a very long time. Okay, yeah, hey, it's pretty cold out there. Can you guys let me in? Us, Gentiles. Okay, so we did used to be excluded, and Ephesians 2 will say we are without hope and without God in the world. So why are we doing the Passover thing? What does it have to do with us? What does the Passover thing have to do with us as Gentiles at all? I'm going to read a passage. It's in Colossians 2:16-17. And I'm warning you, normally this passage is exegeted or interpreted exactly the opposite of what it means, partly because the English is ambiguous, okay? But contextually, I'm going to argue the opposite. Therefore, do not let anyone judge you with reference to eating or drinking or participation in a feast or a new moon or Sabbath, which are a shadow of what is to come, but the reality is Messiah. Now, this is how this is interpreted. It hinges on the ambiguity of with reference to participation. What does that mean? You know what's funny about it? It's not worded in the negative. So the English is actually stronger for a positive interpretation, even with the ambiguity. But this is how this is typically read. Don't let people judge you because you don't participate in eating or drinking in a feast or a Sabbath or these things. That is how Protestant Christians and Christians in general have been reading this. But there's not a clear reason in the text itself that you should insert a negative, and actually it'll create some confusion if you insert a negative. So, okay, you're good to go, bro. The way we read this verse is, don't let people judge you, Gentiles, when you participate in a feast, and we know it's Gentiles because of the context of Colossians 2. Okay. So it's an interesting thing, but that's the argument. And the TLDR for how I'm exegeting this verse, okay, too long didn't read. You didn't know what TLDR is. Gentiles and Messiah still participated in Jewish feasts in the churches that Paul planted and in the early church in general. Okay, that's why. That's how I read that. So this is the reason we're talking about Passover. Passover is a Jewish feast. All right. Okay, here's a question that often follows on the heels of this. Yeah, but are we obligated? Like, people who did this the wrong way died. Also, isn't it legalistic to require Gentiles to observe the Torah of Moses? Okay. And here's the answer to that question. We are celebrating Passover, not observing it. Okay? Like in Hebrew, that would be shamar. We're not shamar. We're just samech. We're rejoicing and enjoying it, but we are not guarding it or watching it. We're not obligated to do it. So we memorialize it joyfully without the duty to meet obligations that Moses' Torah places on the people of Israel. So if people do ask you, you don't answer them by saying, we must do this in order to be accepted by Yahweh, or in order to meet the obligation of our covenant. That's not true for Gentiles. Okay? And one of the clear examples of this would be Deuteronomy 16 will develop the Passover ritual so that when the temple is built, everyone's supposed to go to the temple. Well, guess what, Gentiles? You're not allowed in the stone temple. You can't go there. You're excluded. All right. More questions. Yeah, but whose Passover do we keep? Aren't there thousands of years of diverse, evolving traditions and practices within Judaism? This is true, and this is actually a question that has to be dealt with or answered. Okay. We're going to try to celebrate Moses' Passover, i.e. Passover as it's described primarily in the Torah. Okay? Primarily. That's our goal. We're going to try to keep Moses' Passover. Okay? I don't know if what YouTube Live looks like. Hopefully, I'm pretty sure in YouTube Live they swap it so that it's not backwards. Right now on the film, it's backwards. So good luck, people. Hope you're like Leonardo da Vinci. All right. Now here's a goal to keep in mind. Jew and Gentile at one table. That's our goal. Right now in our body, we don't have any Jewish disciples. But we have the hope that we'll be able to share the gospel and there will be Jewish disciples who will be in our midst. And so we want to be prepared for that today. So Jew and Gentile at one table is this goal. And here's a passage that I want to read. And what's underlined is really the thing that's most important. And I'll say that loudly. Therefore, I'm in Ephesians 2, 11 through 16, in case anybody wants to read along. Therefore, remember that formerly you, the Gentiles in the flesh, the so-called uncircumcision, by the so-called circumcision in the flesh, made by hands, that you were at that time apart from Messiah, alienated from the citizenship of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, not having hope, and without God in the world. But now, in Messiah Yeshua, you, the ones who were once far away, have become near by the blood of Messiah. For he himself is our peace, who made both one. Who are the both? That's really what I want you to focus on. Jews and Gentiles. Who made the both one and broke down the dividing wall of partition. Now, this does not just mean made just all Jews that ever existed and all Gentiles that ever existed one. It means the Jewish disciples of Yeshua and the Gentile disciples of Yeshua are being made into one. And what divided them before Messiah destroyed in his own body, we're going to see that, and broke down the dividing wall of partition, the enmity in his flesh, invalidating the Torah of commandments and ordinances in order that he might create the two in himself into one new man, thus making peace, and that he might reconcile both in one body to God through the cross, killing the enmity in itself. The enmity between the seed of Jacob and Israel and the rest of the Gentiles is already in Genesis 3. And it works itself out throughout the scriptures. Okay, and it's actually, the idea of it is built into the Torah as well, with these various practices and ordinances that divide Israel from the other nations. Okay, in Messiah himself, in him, in his body, he has invalidated that division so that in him we are joined. Okay, that's substance, and that's what we all look forward to. Okay, but we're going to talk about what does it look like to live in this age where we're still in shadow before we've fully taken hold of substance. Okay, how do we approach these laws and ordinances regarding the feast, that kind of thing. And the real thing I want you to walk away with, we should aim to reveal the substance of our oneness with Jewish disciples by demonstrating this through shadow. Right? The feast would be the shadow. We should demonstrate this through the Passover. The way we keep Passover, okay, and the way that Jewish disciples are able to continue being observant of the Torah of Moses and be able to eat with us to the degree that they can. Okay, and let's practice celebrating to accomplish this. So that's really what this is a season of us celebrating and really a practicing. I'll say that. It's a season of us practicing. Are there any questions at this point? This might be a good place.
A question about the temple.
Okay.
The temple.
Okay.
If the Jews, the Gentiles,
Mm-hmm.
if the Gentiles couldn't go into the temple,
Mm-hmm.
or I guess were there parts of celebrating Passover that happened just in the temple?
Yeah, there were parts that just happened in the temple, and then there were parts that happened in the home.
So then were the Gentiles not able to observe the parts?
Yeah.
So they had a different version of
They
Passover?
literally, okay, so it's actually, let's go back. So right here, when it says the dividing wall of partition, that is, Paul is like using a metaphor, but he's not using a metaphor. He's actually making a metaphor about an actual wall. Or actually is, and it's funny, they discovered the physical stone that would sit atop this barrier. And it's written in multiple languages that say, any Gentile that crosses this point, his blood will be on his own head. He will be put to death. And this is an interesting side note. The only place in the entire Roman Empire where a Roman citizen could be killed on site with no trial whatsoever is in the temple in Jerusalem. If they step past that barrier, the Jews are allowed to kill them and stone them on the spot, no trial. They take their life in their own hands by trying to cross it. Okay? It's literally a barrier, though. They had a court for Gentiles, the Gentiles' court in the temple. They had an area where Yahweh-fearing Gentiles could go up to that point, and they could have some kind of access to the complex, but no connection to the rituals. Okay? A literal wall. So Messiah, who is our temple, because he's building up a temple, Ephesians makes that big point, he's torn down that wall of partition, okay? So yeah, in the time of Paul, and this is actually a funny thing, one of the ways that Paul gets strung up and arrested in the Acts is they assume because he traveled into Jerusalem for Passover with Gentiles, and they assume with his teaching about fellowship with Gentiles that he brought Trophimus the Ephesian inside. Because they saw him traveling in Jerusalem, they assumed he brought him in, and that's how they whip up the crowd. Paul didn't bring him in. Paul had no problem saying to him after he met with James and other people, all right, bro, peace. I'm going to go to the temple. You're out. They had no issue with that difference between Jew and Gentile. They didn't, Paul especially gave us this beautiful example. I am a Torah observant Jew, and my brothers in the truest sense include Gentiles. Okay? So yeah, at the time the temple was standing, there would have been that division. That was totally fine. No issue there. No problem. It's just shadow anyways. That would kind of be what, that would be the kind of argument. If you feel excluded or left out as a Gentile, it's like, it's shadow. And it's not yours. That shadow, the access to that shadow was given to the Jewish people. It was not given to you. Yeah. Any more questions about that?
I have more questions, but
Any that you think that would apply to how to observe Passover?
I have like a general question.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I still don't fully. You might have explained this, and I just didn't get it. I still don't fully understand how it went from the actual observance of the night of Passover to commemorating it with a whole week. And there being temple practices with that.
Yes.
And then now that there's no standing temple, how the tradition of that, how the tradition then moved to observing it only in the home because there's no standing temple, and whether those transitions are like outlined in scripture or whether they're
not outlined in scripture. Were you there yesterday for Foundation Talk?
I was.
Okay. We went through a lot of the evolving practices yesterday. I didn't talk about the devolving practices, nor did I talk about how exile really altered and changed their practices. Exile necessarily changes it. So today you will see some communal aspects in the synagogue, okay, but a lot of it is confined to the home. Passover as a ritual was peculiarly associated with the home and with families, okay? And at the same time, it began as they moved into the nation, it began to have some nationalized components. And it definitely at the very start had a nationalized component, which is, hey, we're all escaping as a nation together. We go in companies together to escape, this kind of thing. So it is
the initial celebrating in the wilderness.
So the question then that follows is, how does it go into a week? Chapter 13, which follows on 12, is attached on in the Torah, and it talks about what will it look like after you actually escape to keep this, and it's associated with a week-long commemoration of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. There are a lot of questions about how these practices were observed the first time versus wilderness times versus the monarchy versus judges. You can be certain with how messy the book of Judges is that nothing was happening, right? So, so there's no silver bullet that explains what the state of things were like when it comes to Passover. It's very messy business. And the Torah itself, because of the nature of the Torah, how it was contributed to and compiled and recompiled, that kind of thing, it's really complicated to try to determine the chronology. So so it's kind of a non-answer, but it's not an obstacle. It's not that in a way that provides us a freedom, because it's like, this isn't really clear to begin with. Anybody who tries to make it clear or present it as clear, almost always they have an objective, which is that looks like trying to not subjugate, but what's this word? Underemphasize or downplay. That's the word. Typically, people who try to make it seem clearer than it is, they have a motive that's attached to downplaying the role of exile. Okay, and also downplaying the role of covenantal obedience. Okay, people like to imagine they whitewash the past. Does that make sense? A lot of people do this on the issue of Passover. They whitewash the past. They imagine that, take for example, that David is a man after God's own heart, that certainly he maintained Passover ritual correctly. No, he didn't. It's told in the book of Kings that Passover was never actually carefully carried out in the land until Josiah. So now, and in David's defense, the temple complex was in pretty crappy shape right before he was born. So he longed for that union, and he longed for it to be brought together in a good state. But some people try to whitewash the past and make it like he had all these specific. And he didn't. He didn't. God was satisfied with his people even in their messiness, as he is today. But we should continue to aim to please his heart. Okay. We're going to get to that idea, which is this is kind of an experiment, and that's okay. We're trying to move forward. We're trying to implement what God has given us the best that we can, because acting and moving in the direction that pleases God's heart is better than refusing to move because you don't have perfect coordinates. Always that way. Always, always, always that way. Okay. When you don't have a degree of clarity, like to the degree that you lack clarity, rather, it is better to press into trusting God and pleasing his heart as best you know how with the information you have. Okay. Now, for us, this is, it necessarily means it's going to be messy, okay? This might be our first attempt, okay, at Passover. Nailed it. Maybe our second and third, too. Yeah?
If it's a celebration and not an observation, because we don't have, like, the right or command or whatever to observe it, then is anything really clear about how to do it? Because it's just a celebration. Like, couldn't any commemoration or celebration of that event be right?
Good
because
question.
At least you're doing it, and it's not because we can't actually do the rituals per se.
Well, let's just throw out at the outset, they're not going to have a right. You're not going to have a right way to do it in light of the Torah because of all the elements that are broken. So absolutely. I will argue this. Given our context and what the goals are, there are better ways to do it. And I'll give you a principle that I think is the best. And I'll do that at the end. I can say it now so that you're ready for it at the end. A principle that I think makes our approach better is these rituals are a shadow that point to the substance that is Messiah. Okay, they are a shadow of the substance of God's desire to fully and locally be Israel's God, okay, and dwell with them, and all that he went through to take them out of bondage and bring them to himself. Okay, so whatever we do, we ought to try to pick up the actual existing narrative, elements from that narrative, arrange those elements that we've identified as best we can, and try to use and practice with those elements in a way that reaches that objective of shadow pointing to substance. Now that's a tall task, but we can already throw it at the outset. There is no one right way. There just isn't. And in that sense, and it's okay for us as well, because we're not like, this pickle of a problem it has pincers for people who are trying to observe the Torah. People who are binding themselves to the Torah of Moses. Okay, this is a strike at their heart. This is a tragedy, and there's no, like, people will try to use compiled traditions to try to hide or minimize that tragedy, but it's glaring. Yeah.
One more. If there's no, because the opposite of right is not wrong, it's just not right.
Sure.
We know there's not a specific right way. Is there a specific wrong way?
Are there wrong ways? Yeah, well, if I say there are better ways, then there would be worse ways. And I would say that the measure that, this is a funny thing about actions. The way you will be judged is you will be judged by your conscience. Okay? God will judge your conscience. I literally can give you an example. Someone takes the time to write a love letter. Okay? We'll take twin brothers. One twin brother sits down to write a love letter. The other twin brother sits down and writes the exact same love letter. Both of them go to the exact same street, the exact same location, the exact same mailbox, and they put the letter into the mailbox. One deserves to be stoned, and Yahweh is deeply pleased with the other.
The intention.
One wrote a love letter to his mistress, and the other wrote a love letter to his wife. Okay, so the external actions, okay, these are identical to a T. Okay, and yet Yahweh will divide it based on the intention. Like even if the words of the letter are identical. Okay, so this demonstrates to you that like think about the metaphor of the letter of the law. Yeah.
What's a mistress?
A mistress is a side lady. Your mommy is my only woman. You're supposed to be a one-woman man. That's what the Torah teaches us. Yahweh tells Adam and Eve to come together, and they're one. But some men aren't. They refuse to be satisfied with one, and they pursue other women while they should be pursuing one. It's adultery. Remember the seventh commandment, the seventh house rule?
Yeah. Marriage
is made of two people, not many people. Do not commit adultery.
Mistress is one of those many people.
That's right. One of the many people. Okay. So our first attempt. Here's the thing, though. Okay, we are God's children. There are times in the Torah where they do not fully keep the Passover ritual according to the Torah. Literal times. And God doesn't strike them. God hears someone praying for them and overlooks it. He is pleased with us aiming at trying to please his heart. Okay? So we are trying. Yeshua will help us as we move, but not before. It will be messy. That is something that I hold to. Yeshua helps us as we move. Yeshua helps us as we move. He would have been okay with the Pharisees being afraid about his messiahship if they asked them as they decided to follow him. Okay? That's quite a different thing. Quite a different thing. And that's actually probably the difference between Gideon in the Bible and the Pharisees. Gideon asks questions and makes demands of Yahweh, and it doesn't count as putting Yahweh to the test. Instead, he actually gets put in the hall of faith in Hebrews 11 because of it. Okay? But the Pharisees ask for a sign. Okay? They demand things of God, and they're told that they're wicked and adulterous.
Which Gideon?
Gideon in the Bible. Gideon in the Bible. And the difference is Gideon is saying, I am your follower. I am moving ahead with this. But I'm humble about it. Give me a sign because maybe I'm being arrogant about this. Okay? Whereas the Pharisees say, they are actually being arrogant, and they are saying, "Give me a sign, and I'll be your judge." Okay, you do the thing, and I'll be the one who judges whether or not you're really Messiah. Okay, whether or not this really is the will of God, that kind of thing. So it really is, again, it's down to the heart thing. Okay, we're gonna move on. Let's get started. We're gonna talk about the elements. Okay, we've got 7 elements. 1, the lamb. 2, the blood. 3, leaven-freed space. 4, unleavened bread or matzah. 5, bitter herbs. 6, wine. 7, shared table with family. Okay, these are the 7 elements that I have identified. Okay? Show me a picture, I'm lost. Okay, this is how a lot of people feel about this stuff. So this is because we said we're going to try to do this according to Moses's Torah, or kind of Moses's approach to Passover, the first 5 books. 1, they would have a lamb present. 2, the blood would have been applied, okay, not for the entirety of Israel's history because eventually they weren't allowed to apply the blood to their door because they had to go to the temple. 3, leaven-free space. Okay, they got rid of the leaven. That was also changed when they went to Jerusalem as well. Different ways to approach that issue, that element. 4, unleavened bread. Okay, matzah right there, but unleavened bread. 5, bitter herbs. Okay.
That was added, wasn't it?
Huh?
Isn't that added?
What?
Bitter herbs?
No, bitter herbs is part of it.
From the beginning?
From the beginning. No, Exodus 12, bitter herbs.
These
These are from Exodus 12, by the way.
There's no arrow on bitter herbs.
Yeah, there is no arrow.
Oh man, I messed up. Sorry. Bitter herbs are probably right there in that fuzzy picture. Would it have helped? I don't know that it would have. Okay. So bitter herbs. Thank you guys. 6 is wine. Okay. 7 is a shared table. Now, wine is not immediately identified in Exodus 12, which is the first narrative. However, wine is a part of the Passover ritual in the temple itself, and that's enumerated in the book of Numbers. Okay. That's a diagram of the elements we're aiming for. Okay, next is the hard part, or harder part, not the hardest. Next is identifying and arranging the elements we will use. Okay, because we're not in Israel, we're not escaping Egypt, we're not actually in Mitzrayim. Okay. 1, we'll start with the lamb. Okay?
The lamb.
Yeah. Question. Do we slaughter an actual lamb or goat? Do we just have a lamb shank as a symbol? This kind of thing? What do we do? I bring it up because this is actually one tradition of certain strands of Orthodox Judaism. They'll just bring a lamb shank. They don't actually bring the meat because they're not able to take the lamb and sacrifice it in the temple.
What's a lamb shank?
It's a bone. Just a bone. Okay?
Oh.
So I'm giving you 2 poles. Okay? 2 polarities. Do we get a goat in there? Or do we just have a bone as a commemoration or a symbol? You know, this kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to give you some options. All these suggestions are going to be options. 1, use an actual roasted lamb. I think that's a possible option. 2, you can use a lamb shank as a symbol. I think these are good options. These are not, by the way, exhaustive. These are not exhaustive options. There's going to be a lot of freedom in how to do this. The biggest defeater, I think, is for us to try to find out, or for us to try to avoid any kind of practice that would prohibit a Moses' Torah observant Jewish disciple from eating with us. That's really the only defeater. Other than that, there's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of freedom in the positive direction. Okay. So for this one, for the lamb, there's different ways about going about this. Yeah.
Are we actually going to have roasted lamb?
We would be able to. I don't know. I actually don't know what our household is going to be doing. And this is kind of just presenting the information and casting vision, and we'll see what happens. I think in the future we may. Yeah.
So not allowing Torah observing Jews would be like having pork or having
Bingo.
like mixing dairy.
That would be. Those
Okay.
would be. Yeah. These would be the exact.
Okay, so just the food
Anything that would be-
cleanliness.
That's a really great point. Yeah, the food cleanliness. It's really hard it's hard, in my opinion, to understand what the Torah actually envisioned in regards to eating blood, for example. But if the conscience of a Jew is pricked because the meat was not done well enough, that might be an example of a way to move forward, you know, that kind of thing, or at the very least getting them well done. Because I'm not entirely certain that that's what the blood ritual in Leviticus is describing, because it seems to be more talking about a ritual where you pour the blood out on the ground and drain it, and less concerned about how it is cooked and prepared. It's more concerned about the blood draining ritual on the ground. But either way, that's an example. That's a great question. Again, one of the reasons it's so plastic and you're so free in it is the temple is gone. The people are in exile. You could even be further. You could go further and say, while the first Passover was commemorated and kept in the land itself, did it change once the people got the land? Yes, it did. If they lose the land, does the ritual then have to change because they're in a different land? That's actually a question that's really complicated. I mean, rabbis struggle over this. Okay, but for us, it's just a matter of like, okay, there's freedom, and we want to commemorate, we want to memorialize, we want to celebrate. Those are the words that we're focusing on. We're not worried about performing this incorrectly so that we aren't accepted by God. That's a lot of people talk about observing Passover. if there is a negative, the negative is a hypothetical for us right now. It's if there's a Jewish disciple who wants to keep the Torah of Moses, we don't want them to stumble. It's a more refined thing. There are issues, but there's also a lot of freedom. And by the way, lest people watch this and say, yeah, well, what about this practice? And what about this ritual? And all this kind of stuff. Like Exodus 12 enumerates almost none of the extended Haggadah and other rituals that are associated with how Jews today will keep Passover. So again, we're just trying to restrict ourselves to Moses, not the thousands of years of traditions that follow. 2, the blood. Okay. Do we slaughter an animal? Use real blood? What should we use for blood? Is the wine sufficient for this? Okay. These are the kinds of questions that you might run into with the element of the blood. So here's some options. 1, this might sound weird, but there's a reason for it. Okay, you're free to do it. You could actually do multiple of these, but 1, use a red magic marker to mark individuals, okay, who are disciples. That's a possibility. 2, you can use red chalk to mark your door. Okay. 3, wine could be your doubling substitute element, meaning the blood element, because of our understanding of Messiah and the Last Supper, the wine itself could just be the element of blood. I think these are options. These are options.
So you put wine around your doorpost.
Not wine, no. I would not put wine on your doorpost, no. Because part of what Yeshua says is interesting, is it's for consumption. The wine is to be consumed, which makes us more like altars in that instance. But okay.
Excuse me?
Mm-hmm.
You say I put magic marker on individuals, you mean?
Disciples.
Okay.
I mean individual disciples. Yeah. So if someone, like singular disciples is what I'm saying.
Disciples only.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. A better way to say it would be each, on each disciple who's willing to be marked. Okay, it's not like a...
you have to do it.
Yeah, you don't have to do it. And part of the reason I would say that is because we are the house. We are the house. So the new covenant is the old covenant expanded, so that the exact same functions in the old covenant are present in the new covenant. But what we've done is we've changed the functionary and we've amplified it. So a lot of our connections to the old covenant will be, we are actually the space that's being selected as sacred space, and Messiah is the priest doing job in us. Does that make sense? That's actually a lot of the parallel, which is why you would have the idea that Yeshua would say, drink his blood. Nobody drank blood. He purposely said this to be tricky. This would be like one of the most revolting. That's actually abomination, to eat, consume, or drink blood. Okay? Unless he's being tricky and you are an altar with a fire on it. Because an altar with a fire on it will be said to eat and drink. They'll use these verbs in Hebrew. You'll eat the lamb, the fire, the flames, okay? And you'll drink the blood that's poured out on the altar, that kind of thing. So we've changed positions. We're now actually the altar. We've been brought into sacred space, that kind of idea. Okay. Leaven free space. 3. Okay. Do we have to get rid of all yeast products? What about beer? Didn't Paul and Yeshua say hypocrisy was the yeast or leaven? Okay. A lot of questions you can have about this. No lie, this one's the trickiest. Okay, here's some suggested options. This element to me is the trickiest. Okay, here's an option. Identify hypocrisy as the leaven. Okay, according to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5. 2, you could try to avoid consuming leaven for a week, starting this evening. That would have been a practice. Some of the Jews who traveled to the temple would have kept the week of unleavened bread either the week before they traveled or during the week they traveled, where they're not throwing leaven out of their house, but they're just not consuming leaven. Okay. 3, try to throw out all leaven products of your house. This is more complicated. These are options.
You
Okay?
literally throw it away. Like, do you kick it out?
They would find it and throw it out. Yeah. Some people would sell it. That's actually how later Jews would do. They'll sell the leaven to Goyim or Gentiles.
So is something leaven like something that
Yeast.
with yeast in it?
Yeast.
So like cupcake
Sure.
doesn't
Yeah.
have yeast.
Yeah, so then that would be, this is where you're getting the place of modernity and the way in our cooking materials, instruments, this kind of thing. It's complicated, yeah.
Come on.
Explore it. Whatever you do, do it unto the Lord is what I would say. That's what Paul will say about these kinds
So
of
no
issues.
yeast for so no, we're not gonna have yeast.
It's all dependent on which option the household will opt for and move it. It all
So no
depends.
cupcakes for my birthday?
It all depends on the household and the option you have.
Most cupcakes don't have yeast.
Yeah.
I'm good.
In fact,
Okay.
none
Now,
I can think of.
this one is very difficult, and it's the most pernicious. I know that this is the trickiest element for the goal of future Passovers, the Torah observant Jews and Gentiles dining together in the same house, the same space. This could be the most complicated because the Torah of Moses does seem to imply throw the leaven out of your homes and your domiciles from your houses. That's going to be complicated for Jews to be able to share space in a house for Pesach where they have not thrown out the leaven. This is probably the most complicated for that future goal. Let's just leave that for future us to wrestle with. For now, I don't. It doesn't affect us, but it's something to pray about and think through. I do think I'm trying to identify what I think is the most tricky. I'm okay with there being unsolved problems right now. We'll move ahead. Are there any questions about that?
That second option, sorry, I just want to clarify. That second option was you don't get rid of it, you just don't consume it.
Yeah, try to avoid
Okay.
consuming leaven for a week.
And then
That's
the
another
third
option.
would be you don't consume it, but you
Or
also
if,
get rid
well,
of it.
if you do the
Okay.
third one, you could do the first one as well. But if you do the third one, you've already taken care of the second one
Yeah, right.
because
Yeah.
you're not eating it. It's not you're not eating it.
Third one, second one on steroids.
Yeah. Okay. So 4, unleavened bread and matzah. Okay. Is there a special unleavened bread we have to use if we prepare it? Does preparation matter? Can we use any bread without yeast? Answer. If you prepare, this is an option. If you prepare, try to prepare it hastily to commemorate the speed of Israelite preparation. This is extended in rabbinic law to the point that if it takes longer than such and such a time, it's invalidated as a candidate. Okay. Yeah.
No yeast in bread tastes bad.
No, not necessarily.
No.
Matzah's
No. This is just flatbread. And 2, here's an
Like
option.
pita bread. Have you ever had that?
Yeah. Yeah, so an option is you can use any flatbread that lacks yeast. That's an option. Seems pretty straightforward. Okay. Bitter herbs. Is there a particular herb I have to use? Can I use, what does that mean? Can I use herb? I don't know what I was writing. Does bitter mean it needs to, does bitter mean it needs to taste bad? These are questions about the bitter herbs. They're not identified. An express species is not identified in the Torah. So we don't know what plant they ate. Options. You can use any herb that lacks a sugary sweet taste. Okay. Another option. You can use herbs like horseradish that are particularly bitter or acerbic to the taste. Okay.
What's a syrup?
Acerbic is like bitter. It's just a sharp, bitter taste. Yeah.
Does bitter mean like sour?
No, it's a little different.
Is like
Bitter is what
It's
you're
strong.
trying to describe. Bitterness is it's it's so primal. So it's a primal thing. If you haven't tasted it, I think certain types of beer are very bitter. IPAs are very bitter.
Like it's strong.
Is it lemons and stuff?
Lemons
Those
are
are
more sour.
acidic.
They're sour. They're
So
sour.
strong.
There are things that are sweet that are strong. Strong doesn't help us. Bitter is it just is a portion of our tongue that picks up a type of taste. If you've ever had
Something that is burnt. Something that is burnt, sometimes like super burnt
What about
chips or
marshmallows?
something can
Yeah.
taste
What
bitter.
about
Because
marshmallows?
it just tastes,
yeah.
it tastes almost
When they set
without
the fire.
flavor to a point of like, tastes like dirt or burnt something. Like
Sure.
there's just
Like marshmallows.
nothing good about it.
Another could I personally think that something that's super salty, like really like someone who's over salted something can activate a thing. It's like bitter makes you feel like this.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, you don't want it in your mouth. Okay?
That's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. Nothing good. It doesn't taste good.
Yeah.
Nothing about it
Wait,
tastes
but-
good.
What about a marshmallow when it's set on fire?
I like
I don't think so.
You not eat
Marshmallows actually
foods.
Huh?
Isn't it nature's way of making you not eat certain foods? Like
Yeah, it
usually
is.
poisonous things are bitter.
Yeah, most poisonous things are bitter. Most harmful things are bitter. It is. It's kind of like we're programmed by nature to have that sensory or have that sense engaged to food that's typically poisonous. Things that are typically that are bitter, that are identified as bitter by our body, typically are not good for us in large
What's the
quantities.
purpose of the bitter herbs? Or the symbolism?
The symbolism is direct. This is one of the few symbols that is just directly outlined to symbolize your bitter slavery. Sir?
Okay.
Sir? Excuse me. So the bitterness of your slavery, the bitterness of your oppression, that's what you do to commemorate it. 6 is wine. Is there a special wine I have to use? Can I use juice instead of wine? Okay. Options. You can use red wine with the option of grape juice as a non-alcoholic option. I say red because I would argue that because there are things in Genesis and other places that talk about the blood of the grape, this kind of thing. That is what they intended. They did not use white wine or seltzer or all kinds of things that, believe it or not, I've seen people do that. Okay. All right. And then 7, shared table with family. Okay. Do we do this together as a giant assembly? Do we do this by household? Do we invite unbelievers? Okay. Options. You can have multi-household extended celebrations of Passover. That's an option. A second option. You can isolate the practice to just your household. That's an option. The third is you can do any combination of 1 and 2 while inviting blood or marital relatives and unbelievers to participate. It's quite free in this. Okay. I think there's a positive incentive to invite people, who are family and bring them in. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And even unbelievers. Yeah. Nothing? Okay.
Yeah, just so I saw something.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about what do we do? With all the elements combined, what do we actually do? Now that we've tried to identify them, what do we do with them? Okay. In order to actually celebrate Passover. Okay. So now it's time to talk about how the elements will interact with each other via practices. Okay? Our powers combined, Captain Passover. All right, let's see. Great. Show me step by step. It might be what some of you want. It might be what some of you are thinking. Some people are built that way. Hannah's not here. God bless her. I'm sure that's what she would want. So list it out step by step. And part of the problem is there are too many options that I've given you to list out a universal step by step. We will say we'll do Passover 1 step at a time. We'll try that. And I'll leave a lot of the steps up to you. So I will list out practices that I encourage, assuming certain options are in place. So I'm already going to assume some of the options that I listed. Okay. And I'll give you examples of practices that I think would be good to put in place when you celebrate Passover. All right. First one, opening. I think I'd suggest opening prayer. Okay. The element would be the shared table with family. Have someone call out Yeshua and give him thanks for all that he has rescued you guys, so not just the speaker, but people there, rescued you from, and pray for the protection of those under your roof by name. That seems to me to be, again, this is an option. I think it's a great way to start, is to invoke the name of Yeshua or Yahweh, okay? Sorry, just remind Yahweh. Thanks, I'll pass. Okay. 2. Are there any questions about that, by the way? Huh? Great, pretty straightforward. Okay, 2. Read Exodus 12 and Last Supper passion portion out loud. Okay, that's the element is shared table with family. You read Exodus 12 and an accompanying Last Supper passion narrative out loud. Okay, not narrative or portion. So that's literally like, hey, let me share some of these stories from Yeshua's suffering and or the Last Supper. Okay, and also read Exodus 12. I think that's a good. I think it's a good. It is a good practice. So time for some light reading. Okay. Here's another one that I think could be good. And I actually numbered them in case somebody wanted to say, well, let me just rip this off and do it in the exact same order. That might help some people who are anal. Confession and repentance. Okay. This element would be the leaven-free space. Searching yourself as God's house. Specifically identify insincerity and hypocrisy and confess it and repent. Okay? Listen to my hypocrisy. This could be a very good way to put that element into practice. Okay. Sorry. I still love this. Begin to consume consumable elements. That would be like, you could do this as a step forward. Okay. And the element that would be used is wine, bitter herbs, matzah, lamb. Okay. Have a person go through the elements one by one, naming their significance, and then consume or sip them together at the same time, one after the other. That kind of thing. Okay. Not meaning that might be heard as sip all at the same time. All I'm saying is have a ritual where each component, someone stands up and they describe its significance, and then we all partake of that component. Okay. You don't have to consume all of it at that moment. So, yeah. So we don't have to wait on everyone to finish their lamb, for example. the bitter to eat your Passover herbs. Sorry. All right. And then this one is kind of a 4 to 5. The last one was step 4, and this one you could do in between and during the 4th step when you're consuming if you wanted, and you can do it after as well. Children asking why. That's actually in Exodus 12. Okay. Element, shared table with family. Children asking why or why questions is blocked out. I didn't mean to do that. Okay. So you would invite children present or the youngest able speaker, okay, to ask questions that start with why about Passover. You can feed the questions to them. You can whisper the questions to them if you want, okay? Mommy and Daddy, why Passover? Okay? This is engaging conversation, and it's supposed to be conversation about our identity. It's supposed to be us discussing how we got here and how we became the people of God. Okay? And I'll leave you with this. Celebrate, give thanks, feast, converse, or converse heart to heart, remember. These are the kinds of practices that I think are going to be the most important. Celebrate, give thanks, feast, converse heart to heart, remember. Okay?
CFH.
And I'll leave you with kind of a final note. Okay? Connect the shadow to the substance of Messiah. Passover points to Messiah. In your conscience, choose Messiah afresh this evening. In your mind, think on Messiah this evening. In your heart, love on Messiah this evening. In your body and with your resources, dance, point to, and lift up Messiah this evening. This is, I want to give that as a name to disciples. And remember Yeshua. He is our reason for the season as Gentiles, okay? For those who have met Yeshua, he's the entire reason and substance that we celebrate the Shadow Feast. So I think that's everything. Are there any questions? Any questions?
Does this like happen every night for a week?
Okay, so tonight would be the kind of opening ritual. You have 7 days of kind of relaxation. Some people extend it and have feasts and eat these things throughout. Okay, that kind of thing. There's different ways to approach it. There's different ways to do it. But most of today applied to how we can start the feast and have the specific Passover feast on the Erev Pesach, the evening.
The celebration will go on for
a week.
But there's a party tonight.
Will this interrupt fasts?
Huh?
Will this interrupt
fast? I would say yes. You should not fast during Pesach. You shouldn't fast during Passover. It's literally a shorthand way to describe these weeks and these festivals. It's a feast. Yeah, do not fast during if you are trying to observe a feast. Okay, I had a question from somebody.
Is it supposed to be like a week-long Shabbat?
Okay, wait, give me a second. Charlotte Shea, can you please post a list or send it around for us when you're done? Absolutely. Yeah, I can do that. And then, okay. All right. Okay, and then what was that question? Now, a week of
Is it
Shabbat?
supposed to be like a week-long Shabbat?
There are different ways to. Okay, so let's see. There are different.
Or is that touched on? I know there's no right way to do it. But
Yeah, that's the issue. This one will actually be a little bit easier to implement for Jewish disciples of Yeshua in terms of those who are obligated. I think if you wanted to go further and say I will Shabbat every time that the Torah tells an observant Jew to Shabbat in freedom, you can do that as a kind of celebration.
do they do that? They Shabbat for the whole week?
I think there's a distinction between like more stringent Shabbats, more like no work whatsoever, and then a regular Shabbat.
It's a feast Shabbat.
Yeah, let me.
But if it was like a Shabbat week, then why would they leave collecting all their cattle and all their belongings?
No, the very first. Now, granted, I said that at the beginning. The very first time the Exodus took place, this did not happen. Does that make sense? Because they were exiting Egypt. Okay. But afterward, this would be the kind of feast that we commemorate.
So they weren't in the same. So they left Egypt.
Yeah.
Before they.
Okay, this part's a little confusing in terms of the timing. Some people will say it's 8 days because Passover is the meal they have tonight, and then starting from Passover, we have 7 days of unleavened bread festival, and on the 8th day, there's another feast. That's one way to do it. And and you do this year to year. The timing is a little tricky. It's even hard to try to figure out how they commemorated that timing for the whole week-long festival in the New Testament, for example. There are actually raging arguments about what day Yeshua died, for example. Whether it was a Wednesday or Friday. It's just like there are people who will just like lose their minds over this issue. So for us, I think there's a lot of freedom in what you want to do. Some people will kind of just relax the whole time, that kind of thing. Maybe they'll lighten their work. It's a time for people to visit and go be with family. I would say this, that there's a lot of ways to approach this. I think it's beyond the scope of this, this discussion. This talk is just about, hey, how do we do the feast that commemorates the night they escaped, the Passover feast itself? And it's less with how it's intertwined, how it becomes intertwined with the week of unleavened bread. The rationale for unleavened bread in the actual night of escape was haste. They didn't have time to employ it, or didn't have time to rise, that kind of picture, whatever. Yeah. So I think, are there any more questions? No? Cool. Great. Bless you guys. I think it's pretty straightforward. We're only 10 minutes under an hour anyways. It took 50 minutes, so that's great. Yeah. Turn this off.
Can I get a break?